Okay, hi everybody. It's Kat and I'm back. Maybe you're tired of me being back, but I'm trying to record some quick videos or ideas about what I think is uh, going on in Games of Thrones, history and mythology that plays into George R. R. Martin's story. And these ideas might have been covered by other people in other places. I'm simply either expanding on some or filling in a few gaps, I hope. Some really phenomenal folks. I keep giving shout outs to them. Game of Thrones Academy. You've got to see those guys. They do a lot about history um, that plays into the Game of Thrones and philosophy. There is Civilization X. They have all the backstory of Game of Thrones, all the houses and the legends and myths, all that great stuff. There's a timeline, which I'm going to talk about the timeline in a moment or in another video. But Raw Wrist, she's snarky, she's funny, um, she's great to watch and does a breakdown of all the episodes plus some other ideas that she has. So I totally recommend her. And Emergency Awesomeness because he does a breakdown of the videos or the episodes and other parts of the story, and he catches all these little things about the prophecies and things that people say that really give you an idea of what's going to happen, what's potentially going to happen in the Game of Thrones. So shout out to all those guys. I'll have links to those. Everybody else, awesome job. Anybody who's talking about it, I'm just one of thousands, I'm sure. Um, so you can see how awesome or how inspirational this whole Game of Thrones is. So um, you can see my other videos, and I really recommend you go back and watch a couple of them. I talked about Niflheim and the Land of Forever Winter, as well as Helheim and Nordic legends, and about uh, once you go there, you don't come back, and it's very similar to the underworld and Greek mythology, and as well as Christian faith. You know, once you go into the grave, you don't come back, except for the few that do. And so this video, I want to talk about Jon Snow because I've seen a lot of people talking about Jon Snow, and there's a lot of awesome theories about Jon Snow and why he came back, etc., etc. Did Melisandre bring him back? Did he warg into wolf or someplace else? Which I think is a potential. Um, but one of the things that I want to talk about is in reference to this idea about crossing into the other world and then coming back. So Jon Snow gets stabbed like 7 times for the watch and they put a sign over him. Kind of looked like the sign above Jesus on the cross, right? But his sign, instead of saying King of the Jews or King of the Wildlings, it just said traitor. And then he lays there and he bleeds out. And he's either dead and brought back to life, or people say, oh, he worked into something and then he came back to his body. And we don't know how long it was. The books don't really even say. The books seem to indicate that it was much longer than the storyline does in the series. Potentially, it was 3 days, which is similar to Jesus rising from the grave, and or even Lazarus. And I think this is what I want to talk about here. So, was Jon Snow dead? Uh, my first answer is yes. And did he come back? And my next answer is yes. And did Melisandre bring him back? And my answer is no. Melisandre did not bring him back. I know, crazy, right? Did he warg into something else? Maybe. But let's think about that. That's mentally. Physically, his body was stabbed 7 times and he stopped breathing. So you have to question yourself. If you get stabbed 7 times and the last one's in your heart, you're definitely dead. And if you're dead, and you've been stabbed in the heart or some other major organs, even if you came back mentally, your body is still freaking dead. So would you come back to a dead body? No, I mean, and if you're dead, you're not healing, right? So I think this is one of those little areas, and why I said I wanted to kind of expand or fill in some gaps. Talk about like the little thing that's missing. So I mean, Don't get me wrong, because George R. R. Martin could, there's a number of things that are just totally ignored in the concept of reality or physicality in order to make something happen. But I do think this is one little area that needs to be explored a little bit. So John gets stabbed 7 times in multiple major organs. And then when he comes back, Melisande and Davos ask him, "What did you see?" And he said, "Nothing. I saw nothing. It was total darkness." And of course, that totally freaked him out. So, on the theory that he was really dead and that he came back, I wanted to talk about all the other things that I've just talked about in other videos. The concept of going to Helheim in the Nordic legends, the underworld in Greek mythology, and going into the grave in Christian theology. So in all of these, you don't come back except for the few people who did. And one of the aspects of the people that do come back, they're actually long living and almost invulnerable, right? So Odin is Odin, the All-Father, the father of the seven. Odin is one of the few that goes to Helheim and comes back. And in Greek mythology, Orpheus, Theseus, and a few others go into the underworld and they return. And there's a few demigoddesses and gods who can come and go in the underworld at Hades' invitation. But one thing I wanted to point out about Greek mythology that kind of was in my mind when I thought about Jon Snow being dead, or was he, was the idea of Achilles. So if everybody knows the story of Achilles, he was totally invulnerable except for this one little place on the back of his heel that we call the Achilles tendon now. And the reason it was that one little place is because his mom was holding him by the back of his heel and dipped him into the river of Styx. You know that river before you can cross into Hades? So kind of like he was dead, but he wasn't dead. So she dipped him in the river by his heel, and it made him invulnerable. So, except for that place on his heel that eventually ended up killing him. So, I don't know. Does Jon Snow have... he's totally invulnerable every place else except for some place we don't know about? So, there's a thought. And, of course, the biggest known character in Christianity, or persona in Christianity, who went into the grave and came out was Jesus Christ. And he came out alive and then ascended into heaven. But he, previous to this, he actually rose Lazarus from the dead. He went into his tomb. Lazarus had been in there for a couple days. God knows what he looked like and smelled like, but Jesus went in there and brought him back to life. So is that kind of like Melisande? Maybe a little bit. But I think more about Niflheim and Helheim and the concept of the veil. So in one of my other, in the one about Christianity, I talked about the veil, that the wall kind of was like the veil that separated the living from the dead, or the sacred from the mundane, etc., etc. And so my thoughts are that Jon Snow had already been to the land of the dead, and he came back. And I don't mean when he was stabbed, I mean before that. So he's gone across several times, ranging, and he went across to Hardhome, and he rescued the wildlings and brought them back, and at some point he jumped in the cold frickin' water so he could make it to the ships that were taking, whatever wildlings that survived back, while everybody else was dead, and they were risen to the army of the others. Kind of like the Hel and her army of undead dead, right? So that's my thoughts. He'd already crossed over, and then he came back. So could they kill him? Literally? No. I mean, like Achilles. He was invulnerable because he'd already been there. And I think this is kind of the concept of Benjen, who's on the other side. I want you to think about him, Benjen, as Hodor, or Balder in the Nordic legends. So he's on the other side, but he's stuck there. He can't come back. But Jon comes back, as do some of the others. And that's the other aspect of the dudes who are brought in that become others after they've been brought back into the castle black, because they were already there and they were dead on the other side. So Jon Snow, I believe he was dead. Now there's an idea out there that he warged into something. So potentially there's both that. So Jon Snow was already dead or had been in the land of the dead, and then he had returned alive, and that made him, harder to kill, basically. So after they stab him and he disappears, or he mentally disappears, what's the, where could he potentially go? And one of the theories that I saw out there was, did he warg into his wolf? Well, I don't know, because he said it was black and dark and he didn't see nothing. Or he didn't see anything. Pardon me for the double negative there. And certainly if he'd been in his wolf, he would have seen a bunch of stuff. Now, would he have told everybody that he saw a bunch of stuff? Maybe not. I don't know, even if he'd tell Davos and Melisandre, because who are these folks? I mean, he already seen them both, kind of doing ridiculously bad things, and Melisandre having Mance Rayder burned at the stake, that kind of stuff. So if I was a dude who warged someplace and was watching out and seeing different stuff, would I tell these people? Probably not. Would I tell anybody else? No, because they'd be all like, oh, okay, something's wrong. They wouldn't be thinking he's a god that's kind of returned, or he's still Jon Snow. They would be superstitious, as would be most people in the Middle Ages, and they probably would try to kill him again. So if I was Jon Snow, I wouldn't tell anybody either. But potentially he warged into something that was somewhere that was dark. And there's a theory out there that in this wall, how did the wall get built? There were ice dragons that helped build it. And potentially there's an ice dragon in a cave somewhere, or locked in the ice. And if Jon Snow's a secret Targaryen, or whatever the story goes, if there was a dragon nearby, there's a big potential, right, that's where he would go. And if the dragon's in a dark cave kind of snoozing away, or just locked there, what would he see? Well, frickin' nothing. It would be black. So if in fact Jon Snow works someplace, that's where I'll go with that. But my other idea is that he may have even went into a were-tree and like the souls of the children, because the Starks are related in some aspect to that. We'll talk about that at some point. But more importantly, I think it's a lot more to do with he's already been to the other side, and he came back through the gates alive, as many do not when they went out ranging, and that is why he was super hard to kill. Not because Melisandre did some magic voodoo and brought him back, because, if you were watching that episode, she really didn't believe she was going to bring him back. And don't you think if there was some magic at play, everybody knows, like Tinkerbell, you want her to fly, you have to really frickin' believe what you're doing. And she didn't really believe, so no, Melisandre didn't bring him back. All right, so there's that one. Next one up, I think I'm either going to do Azor Ahai, and how it reflects King Arthur, or we're going to talk about Bloodraven and Merlin, or maybe we'll talk about those together. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.